It all started with a simple email that I would have easily overlooked, if only it hadn't triggered something in the back of my mind. The email arrived addressed to my ex-wife Katie, on our shared tablet. It wasn't anything that stood out at first, just a notification from a hotel in Austin. It had been sent to Katie's old inbox, which was still accessible through the tablet we had used together over the years. I hadn't bothered to delete her account. It was convenient for checking things, or so I thought at the time. The date on the receipt struck me almost immediately. It was from the weekend she had claimed to be attending a business forum in Chicago. I wasn't suspicious at first. After all, Katie and I had been married for a decade, and I trusted her completely. But then the details in the email began to catch my eye. The hotel receipt was for a double room. And what really stood out was a note. Romantic dinner package. My heart sank when I saw it. I didn't immediately jump to conclusions, but the email seemed like a stark contrast to the story Katie had given me. The business trip she had told me about, the one she'd claimed to be attending in Chicago, was suddenly thrown into doubt. I didn't know what to make of it, but I had to address it. I mentioned it casually when she walked in later that evening. Katie was sitting on the couch, her hair tied up in a messy bun, clearly tired from the day. I knew she had been traveling and had just gotten back. I wasn't expecting a confrontation. No, I just needed an answer. Hey, I saw an email about a hotel booking in Austin this past weekend, I said, trying to sound casual. It said something about a romantic dinner package. Katie didn't miss a beat. She put down her bag and looked up at me with a calmness that didn't fit the situation. Oh yeah, she said with a smile that was almost too smooth. I stayed with a female colleague for the weekend. We were at a forum, you know? We used her credit card for convenience, and they forgot to remove the add-on package. No big deal. Her explanation was quick and confident. Her tone didn't crack, not even for a second. She was good at deflecting. It was always one of the things I admired about her. Her ability to speak with such confidence, even in the face of uncomfortable truths. But I wasn't buying it. The whole situation didn't sit right with me. I nodded, but inside, I was already questioning everything. A business forum in Chicago? I knew she had said she'd be there, but why had the hotel sent her a receipt for a romantic dinner? Her colleague's credit card, her calm demeanor, it was all too rehearsed. Something felt off. For the next few days, I pushed it out of my mind. Katie had given her explanation, and I didn't want to jump to conclusions. But then, something changed. The doubt lingered, a quiet whisper at the back of my mind. I began to recall moments I had once brushed off as coincidences. Katie had always been careful about her phone. Too careful. She never left it around, and when she did, she'd pick it up and lock it immediately, like it was some sort of prized possession. At first, I thought it was just a quirk, but looking back now, I realize I should have paid more attention to the way she hid it from me. There was also the sudden surge in her shopping habits. She had never been into high-end fashion, but recently, she had been buying new clothes, expensive ones, none of which fit her usual style. She would claim they were on sale, which was odd, because I had never seen her buy so many things, especially not when we were cutting back on expenses. When I asked about it, she smiled and told me that it was a great sale. A find she just had to share with herself. She was never really into shopping, but now she was coming home with bags of clothes, high-end bags too, which were far beyond anything I'd ever seen her pick up before. And then there were the strange incidents with her ring. Twice, in recent months, she had lost it. Both times, she was quick to reassure me, saying it had fallen off somewhere, or that she'd forgotten to wear it during a trip. The first time, I dismissed it. The second time, I found myself asking questions I hadn't asked before. How could she lose it so often? She always seemed to have it on, no matter where we went. The second time she mentioned it, I didn't push. I just went along with it. But looking back, I wonder if I was too naive. Then there were the business trips she had started taking more often. It wasn't unusual for her to travel for work, but it had become more frequent, and not for any obvious reason. She told me she was attending various forums, conferences, and meetings, but something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it. There was an intensity in her work that seemed to grow, late-night calls, early morning departures, an ever-growing list of business trips, many of which I couldn't verify or attend with her. I didn't ask too many questions at the time, figuring she was just busy. And the oddest thing of all, the scent. I'd never been the type to notice fragrances, but when she came back from one of her trips, there was this sharp, masculine smell on her. It wasn't one of her usual perfumes. It was something new, something different. I didn't want to seem paranoid, but I asked her about it casually. She laughed and said it was a trendy Eunice *X perfume gifted by her colleagues. At the time, I said nothing, letting it slide. But now that small detail burned in my mind. I couldn't ignore the strange feeling of unease that had settled over me. Everything seemed to line up in my head now, every small, seemingly insignificant event. All of it came together to form a single picture. Katie was changing, and not in the way I had thought. What seemed like innocent quirks or habits now felt like the threads of something else, a hidden life. I couldn't ignore it any longer. But I wasn't ready to confront her yet. No, I was going to wait. I was going to find proof because I wasn't going to let this be a suspicion I carried without certainty. I had to know the truth before I could confront her. And in the back of my mind, I already knew that whatever I found would change everything. The fact that she'd been so calm when I mentioned the email, the way she'd deflected my question with a rehearsed explanation, it was all too convenient. There was a part of me that still wanted to trust her, still wanted to believe that there was an innocent explanation. But deep down, I knew. This was the beginning of something I couldn't ignore, and the road ahead would lead me to truths I wasn't sure I was ready to face. As the days passed, the feeling of unease only grew stronger. I began to wonder if she had already made her decision, and if I was just too late to change things. The lie about the trip to Austin, the unspoken tension, it all built up in my mind like a wall I couldn't break through. I had always been the one to keep the peace, but now, I was wondering if I had been too blind to see the cracks in the foundation of our marriage. I wasn't going to confront her just yet. No, I had to be sure. But every passing day, the questions piled up in my mind. What if she had been seeing someone else? What if she had already checked out of our marriage long before the email ever landed in my inbox? The truth was, I was scared of the answer, but I knew that sooner or later, I had to face it. The question was, would I be ready when that moment came? After that email, I found myself in a state of quiet turmoil. Katie was acting like everything was fine, but I knew better now. The cracks were there, even if she was doing her best to patch them up with smiles and excuses. There were too many things I had ignored, dismissed, and overlooked for too long. I didn't know what to do with all this new information, but one thing was certain. I couldn't keep pretending like nothing was wrong. For the first time in a long while, I started paying attention to the small things. Things I had once shrugged off as quirks or random occurrences now felt like pieces of a puzzle. My mind was piecing together the fragments, and each new piece of evidence seemed to confirm my worst fears. I could no longer ignore the feeling that something was off in our marriage. It wasn't just the email about the hotel in Austin. It wasn't just the way Katie had explained it away so smoothly. It was everything. The little things that had *N to pile up over the last few months. One of the first things I remembered was the way Katie had lost her ring twice in recent months. The first time, I assumed it was just an accident. She had claimed that it had slipped off while doing the dishes or something like that. It seemed plausible at the time. After all, it wasn't uncommon for people to take off rings when they were doing something messy or physical. But then it happened again. The second time she told me that she had misplaced it while packing for a trip, and for some reason I just didn't buy it. I tried not to say anything at first, but my mind kept coming back to it. Why did this keep happening? Why wasn't she more careful with something as important as her wedding ring? It was supposed to symbolize everything we had built together. And yet, it seemed to be slipping through her fingers, both literally and figuratively. I started noticing other things as well. Things that now seemed like clues in a mystery I hadn't even known I was trying to solve. Katie had started spending more money. A lot more money. She wasn't a shopaholic, but suddenly, she was bringing home bags of clothes from high-end stores. Expensive items, too, designer brands I'd never seen her even look at before. When I asked her about it, she would tell me that they were on sale, but it never felt right. The clothes were nothing like what she would normally buy. They seemed out of place, almost like she was trying to create a new image of herself. At first, I told myself that maybe she had just gotten a promotion at work or found something she wanted to treat herself to. But when I thought about it more, I realized that didn't make sense. We were not exactly swimming in extra cash, and her recent purchases were far beyond the budget we had set for ourselves. I began to wonder, was she hiding something? Was she spending money on someone else, on something else? I couldn't shake the thought that these new clothes weren't for me, and they weren't for herself either. They were for someone else. Then there was the issue with her phone. Katie had always been protective of her privacy, which was something I'd respected. But lately, it was different. She would always keep her phone face down when it was lying around, as though she was afraid someone might see something she didn't want them to. She'd laugh it off when I would jokingly ask her about it, telling me that she just didn't want to be distracted. But I knew that wasn't the whole story. I had seen the way she would quickly hide her phone when I came into the room, as though she was trying to hide something from me. I would ask her about it, and she'd tell me the same thing, each time with that reassuring smile. It's nothing, just work stuff. But her voice always had that slightly defensive edge to it, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. It wasn't just about the phone, it was about the secrecy. The constant need to keep things hidden. At the same time, Katie's business trips had become more frequent. I knew she traveled for work, but lately it felt like it was happening more and more. She was always away on some important trip, attending conferences or meetings that I never seemed to be able to attend with her. When she came back, she would regale me with the usual stories, networking, making connections, all the things she had learned. But when I tried to dig deeper, there was always something missing. The details were vague, the stories were inconsistent, and I started feeling like I was being kept in the dark. And then there was the perfume. The sharp, masculine scent that was now on her after every trip. It wasn't like anything she had ever worn before. It wasn't one of her usual floral or sweet perfumes. It had a harsh, almost overpowering note that lingered long after she returned. When I casually asked her about it, she told me it was a trendy Eunice *X perfume that some colleagues had gifted her. It sounded like a plausible explanation at first, but the more I thought about it, the more I began to question it. Why would she be wearing something like that? I didn't ask her any further questions about it at the time, but the seed of doubt had been planted. She had changed, and I could feel it in every little thing she did. The way she spoke, the way she smiled, the way she kept things hidden. There was a distance between us now, and I wasn't sure if it was something we could bridge. I began to question everything. Was she seeing someone else? Had she already checked out of our marriage? Had I missed the signs? I knew I couldn't keep living in this fog of suspicion. I had to know the truth, even if it hurt. It was during one of these long nights of contemplation that the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. 3 weeks before her wedding to Gavin, one of our mutual acquaintances sent me a video from a bar in Austin. The video was blurry, but it clearly showed Katie laughing and hugging a man, her arms wrapped around him. I didn't recognize him, but I didn't need to. The date, the outfit, even the earrings she was wearing matched the ones she had worn on another trip. I couldn't believe my eyes. There was no doubt. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a friendship. It wasn't an innocent drink with a colleague. She had been with him, no one else, just the two of them. I couldn't breathe for a moment. The weight of the truth hit me all at once. It wasn't a business forum in Austin. It wasn't a work trip. Katie had been in Austin, yes, but not for business. She had been there with him. The man in the video, the man I didn't know, the man who had taken her away from me. It was over. My heart sank, and the world felt like it was crumbling around me. I had been living a lie. The woman I had loved, the woman I had trusted, had been hiding something from me for who knows how long. The evidence was there now. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Katie had been unfaithful, and it hurt in a way I couldn't explain. I wasn't angry, at least not yet. What I felt was disbelief. I couldn't understand how things had gotten to this point. How could she do this to me? To us? I needed answers. I needed to hear it from her. But the truth was, I already knew. I just needed to hear her say it. But in the meantime, all I could do was wait. Wait for the moment when I would finally confront her. The moment when everything would change. It had been weeks since I had seen that video. Weeks since the evidence had shattered any illusions I had about my marriage. Every moment since then, I had been dreading the inevitable confrontation. The moment when I would have to face her with the truth, when I would demand an answer to the question that had been haunting me since that night in Austin. But I had been biding my time. I wasn't going to confront Katie without being completely sure. I had to be calm, collected, cold even, because I knew that if I didn't handle this with control, I would lose everything. My emotions were raw, and every moment felt like I was teetering on the edge of losing my grip on reality. but I couldn't allow myself to lose control. Not yet. I kept waiting for the right moment. I would bring it up casually like I always had. I would ask questions, dig a little deeper. But I knew deep down that it would be different this time. I wouldn't be satisfied with her usual deflection, her usual calm answers. I had proof now, something tangible that she couldn't just wave away. She would have to answer for it. And then, just when I thought I couldn't wait any longer, the moment arrived. It was a Thursday evening, about 3 weeks before Katie's wedding to Gavin. I had been keeping track of every detail, the way her behavior had shifted, the increasing number of trips, the lies that had slowly seeped into our daily lives. But this time, the evidence was undeniable. The video, the receipts, the stories that didn't line up, all of it pointed to one thing. She had been hiding something from me. Something big. I hadn't planned it, but somehow I found myself in the right place at the right time. Katie had been unusually distant that afternoon, her phone glued to her hand, typing away in a way that seemed almost desperate. When she left the house to meet up with a colleague, as she called him, I decided it was time to act. I couldn't sit back anymore. I waited until she was gone, then I grabbed my car keys and followed her. I wasn't being paranoid, I was being methodical. Every piece of the puzzle had led me to this moment. The same hotel in Austin, the same man in the video, the same vague business trips that always seemed to keep her just out of reach. I had to know for sure. I had to see it with my own eyes, even if it tore me apart. I followed her to a small cafe on the edge of town. It wasn't a place we ever went to too upscale for our usual taste, but there she was, stepping out of her car, laughing as she met him. The same man from the video. The anger flared inside me like a fire, but I kept it under control. I parked a distance away and stayed out of sight, watching them from across the street. They weren't just meeting for coffee. They were wrapped up in each other, laughing too loudly, standing too close, as if the world around them didn't matter. I waited, my heart hammering in my chest, until they walked inside. The world outside seemed to slow down as I sat there in my car, staring at the entrance. Every instinct in me told me to storm in there, to confront them, to make them face what they had done. But I couldn't. Not yet. I needed more. I needed to be sure. So I waited. It wasn't until they had been inside for a while that I finally made my move. I parked a few blocks away from their line of sight, and walked towards the cafe. I kept my head down, my footsteps measured. I wasn't sure what I expected to find, but part of me hoped that it would be something that would make all of this easier. A simple explanation, a reason to believe that this wasn't as bad as it seemed. But that hope was gone when I stepped inside. They were sitting at the corner booth, too close, their bodies practically touching. She was leaning into him, her hand resting lightly on his, as if they were a couple. As if they had been a couple for a long time. I didn't need to see more. My stomach twisted into a knot, and the words I had rehearsed in my head for weeks suddenly felt useless. What could I possibly say to make this better? To make this right? I turned on my heel and left before they could see me. I couldn't face her, not yet. I couldn't face the woman I had thought I knew. The woman who had been hiding everything from me all along. I drove home in a daze, my mind reeling. What was I supposed to do with this knowledge? What was I supposed to feel? I had proof now, irrefutable proof. But it didn't feel like a victory. It didn't feel like closure. It felt like the end. The end of everything I had ever known, everything I had ever trusted. When I got home, I didn't know what to do. My thoughts were a whirlwind, and all I could focus on was the thought of confronting Katie. The woman I had loved, the woman I thought I knew, was out there, hiding something from me. I didn't know how to handle it. I didn't know how to face her. But I couldn't wait any longer. I had to confront her. I couldn't keep pretending like everything was fine. I couldn't keep pretending like I didn't know what was going on. I sat in the living room staring at the empty space around me. The silence was deafening, a stark contrast to the whirlwind of emotions inside me. I felt like I was drowning. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. All I could do was wait for her to come home. When she finally walked in, her face brightened as she saw me sitting there. She had no idea that I knew. She had no idea that everything was about to come crashing down. She smiled, her eyes lighting up in that way that used to make me feel like everything was going to be okay. But now I couldn't see it. All I could see was the lie. "Hey," she said, walking into the room. "I didn't think you'd still be awake." "I'm awake," I said quietly. "I'm always awake when you're hiding things from me." She froze, her smile fading. "What do you mean?" I stood up, my hands trembling as I reached into my pocket and pulled out the phone. The video. The pictures. The undeniable proof. "Why don't you take a look at this?" I said, holding it out to her. "Explain this." Katie's face drained of color as she looked at the screen, her eyes widening in shock. She didn't say anything at first. She just stared at the video, her hands shaking as she watched herself in the cafe, laughing with him. Please, she whispered, her voice breaking. It's not what you think. No, I said, my voice calm but steady. It's exactly what I think. You've been lying to me, Katie. You've been lying for months, and I've been blind enough to believe it. She shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. Mark, I didn't want this to happen. It just happened. I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to demand answers. But I couldn't. The truth was right there, staring me in the face. I didn't need her excuses. I didn't need her apologies. I don't care about your excuses, I said, my voice cold. I care about the truth. You've betrayed me. And now you have to deal with the consequences. Katie fell to her knees, her hands clasped together in desperation. Please. I didn't mean to hurt you. I love you. But I was done. I was done with the lies, done with the deception. I couldn't do this anymore. I don't know who you were anymore, I said quietly, stepping back. You've already made your choice. Now I have to make mine. And just like that, everything I had known about our marriage came crashing down. The days that followed my confrontation with Katie felt like a blur. Each one bled into the next, and I was no longer sure where the pain from the past ended and the uncertainty of the future began. It wasn't the anger that consumed me, it was the hollow emptiness, the unsettling realization that everything I had thought was true had been a lie. It was a pain that gnawed at me, quietly, persistently, like a shadow I couldn't outrun. Katie's behavior after that night was a study in denial. She tried to apologize, tried to explain away her actions, but I wasn't listening. I had already heard enough lies. There was nothing left to salvage, no room for excuses. We had tried to talk, but her words seemed distant, like she was speaking from behind a veil. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just tired. Tired of fighting, tired of being deceived. And somewhere deep inside, I had already begged *N to accept that this was the end. And yet, despite everything that had happened, I found myself faced with one final, unavoidable moment, the wedding. Her wedding. Katie's wedding to Gavin was scheduled for just 3 weeks after the confrontation. It felt surreal, the timing of it all. Part of me wanted to walk away and never look back. The other part, perhaps the part that still held onto the remnants of what we had once shared, felt the strange pull of closure. I wasn't sure if I was attending to witness the end of something, or if it was to prove to myself that I was stronger than the lies. The invitation had arrived 2 days after our confrontation. A thick, embossed envelope bearing the names of Katie and Gavin in elegant gold lettering. It was meant to be a grand affair, an event filled with pretense, carefully curated for an audience. I could see it now, the estate, the guests, the smiles. Everything would be meticulously planned, every moment a photo op for the cameras. A fairy tale ending, at least in Katie's eyes. I wasn't invited to the wedding as a guest of honor. I was there as an accessory, an afterthought, the ex-husband of the bride. The invitation was a courtesy, nothing more. But as I stood in front of the grand estate, I realized it was also a challenge. It was her way of showing me that she had moved on. And it was my way of proving that I hadn't been broken, not yet. The venue was absurdly lavish. The estate, perched on a hill overlooking the valley, looked like something out of a movie. It had a helipad. White peacocks wandered the grounds, adding an air of faux elegance to the scene. The flowers were so perfectly arranged they could have been artificial. It was the kind of place where everything was choreographed to the smallest detail, where the veneer of happiness was carefully constructed and designed for the eyes of others. And in the middle of it all stood Katie, radiant in her designer gown, as if nothing had happened between us. As if the years of our marriage had never existed. Her face was calm, serene, and perfect. There was no trace of guilt, no sign of hesitation. She wore a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, as if the weight of the situation was only just beginning to sink in. But there was something about her, an energy that seemed to say she was no longer the woman I had once known. She had shed that skin, leaving behind only the shell of who she used to be. This was a new version of Katie, one that didn't need me anymore. I didn't know why I came. Part of me wanted to see it all burn to the ground, to watch as the illusion of their perfect life crumbled in front of my eyes. Another part of me, an even more distant part, wanted to prove that I had moved on, too. That I had nothing left to lose. So, I dressed in my best suit and stood by the bar, quietly observing as the celebration unfolded before me. I could have left, I could have stayed away, but I had chosen to be there. I wasn't there for her. I wasn't there for Gavin. I was there for myself. It was at the banquet that I was formally introduced to Gavin, the man who was now supposed to be her future. He extended a hand, a fake smile plastered on his face, and introduced himself as the lucky guy who had won Katie's heart. His words rang hollow to me, but I didn't react. I just shook his hand. Katie didn't correct him when he referred to me as the former music teacher, as if I were some forgotten relic from her past. I had a moment of clarity when I saw him up close, the man who had somehow managed to fill the void that I had left. Gavin was tall, good-looking, and the type of man who commanded attention with his presence alone. But as I watched him, I saw something else, insecurity masked by arrogance, a need to constantly prove that he was the one who had won in the end. I wasn't threatened by him. Not in the way I thought I might be. I felt sorry for him, in fact. He didn't know the woman he was marrying. He didn't know the lies she had told, the secrets she had kept. He was so consumed by his own ambition and ego that he couldn't see the cracks in their relationship, the way she had built a life around appearances rather than substance. But I had something they didn't know about. Something that would change everything. I leaned in and, in a voice so quiet it could have been a whisper, mentioned that I'd be closing my $480 million investment account at the bank where Katie worked as a top executive. I had been a client of the bank for years, but I had never mentioned the size of my investments to her. Katie had no idea I had kept that much money in her bank, money she had never even known about. She had built her career on maintaining a facade of control and power, but this was the moment that would break it all down. As soon as those words left my mouth, I saw it. Her face froze. The calm mask she had worn throughout the night cracked, and for a brief moment, the real Katie, the one who had lied, the one who had betrayed, peeked through. It wasn't anger that flashed across her face. It was fear. A subtle but unmistakable fear. She didn't know what to do with the information. She didn't know how to react. She had played a role in this entire charade, but in that one moment I had reminded her that I wasn't playing anymore. I wasn't part of her performance. The wedding was everything she had dreamed of. A public show, a display of wealth, status, and success. But it was hollow. I knew it, and deep down I think she did too. All the white peacocks, the elegant gowns, the perfectly arranged tables, they couldn't hide the truth. And for the first time in a long time, I understood that this wasn't her life anymore. It was the life she had built to cover up the lies, the mistakes, and the betrayal. And I had just shattered it. Later that night, when the ceremony was over and people were milling about, enjoying the after-party, I found myself standing on the balcony, staring out at the view. I couldn't help but wonder how much of Katie's life was built on lies. How much of this wedding, this new life she had created, was a performance for the world. In the distance, I could see Lauren, our daughter, walking toward me. She had been quiet all evening, barely speaking to her mother. When she reached me, she didn't say anything at first. She just stood there, looking out over the sprawling estate. Then, with a small sigh, she spoke. "Dad, I don't want to be a lawyer anymore. I don't want to do what Gavin wants." The words hit me like a wave. For years, Katie had pushed Lauren toward law school, away from her own dreams of music production. But Lauren had found herself at my studio recently, discovering her own voice, her own path. And now she was speaking up. "I found my voice, Dad. In music, in production. And I don't want to give it up for someone else's idea of success." I could see the relief in her eyes, the weight she had been carrying, finally being lifted. Katie had always pushed for predictability, for money, for status, but Lauren wasn't interested in any of that anymore. I smiled at her, feeling proud. "I support you, Lauren. You don't need to walk anyone else's path." For the first time in years, I saw Katie's perfect facade begin to crack. She wasn't angry with Lauren. She wasn't fighting her. In fact, she agreed with her. She had no choice but to let her go. The weight of the moment wasn't lost on me. I had one. Not through money, not through anger, but by simply being true to myself. This was my victory. The days that followed Katie's wedding felt like an emotional and psychological battlefield. I had come to the event expecting one thing, closure, maybe even a little bit of triumph, but what I got was an unexpected shift in the balance of power in our family. Katie, for the first time in years, had let go of her need for control, at least in front of me. But it wasn't about me anymore. It was about Lauren. And, surprisingly, it was about Katie finally acknowledging that she didn't have all the answers. When Lauren had told me that she no longer wanted to follow Gavin's pressure and attend law school, I was struck with a sense of calm. It wasn't just a rebellion against her mother's wishes, it was an affirmation of who Lauren had become over the last year. She had spent months working at my studio, diving into music production and finding her own voice. It was clear to me that she had outgrown the rigid expectations Katie had placed on her. What surprised me even more was the fact that Katie had not resisted this change. She hadn't fought back. She hadn't argued with Lauren, tried to convince her to stay on the right path. No, instead, she had done something entirely unexpected. She had agreed. In the days following the wedding, Katie and I barely spoke. The unspoken tension between us was palpable, and I knew it was because we were both standing on opposite ends of something we couldn't cross. But then came Lauren's choice, her decision to change her life and find her own path. And it seemed like it was something Katie couldn't argue with. That night, Lauren and I sat together in the living room, the old, familiar silence hanging between us as we shared a pizza and talked about her future. I could see the excitement in her eyes as she spoke about her plans, her dream of being part of the music industry, producing albums, and creating the kind of art she had been passionate about since she was young. "Dad, I've been thinking about it for a while now," she said, her fingers picking at the crust of her pizza, "and I just can't see myself in a courtroom, you know? I don't want to do what Gavin wants. I don't want to do what Mom wants either." I couldn't help but smile at the certainty in her voice. It reminded me so much of myself when I was her age, when I had pursued music, not for the accolades, but for the pure joy it brought me. "I'm proud of you, Lauren," I said, setting my pizza aside and leaning forward. "You don't need anyone's permission to pursue your own dreams. It's your life." For a moment, we sat in comfortable silence, the kind of silence that only exists between people who truly understand one another. But as I looked at her, I couldn't help but wonder how Katie was going to take this. After all, Lauren had spent years being groomed to follow a different path. How was Katie going to react when her daughter chose a road that wasn't paved in the same way she had envisioned for her? The next morning, when Katie and Lauren had their first conversation about it, I could see the cracks begin to form. Katie had never been one to let go of her plans, her vision of the future. She had always been determined that Lauren would become a lawyer, follow the blueprint she had drawn out for her since she was a child. But today, Lauren was telling her a different story. She was telling her that she had found her own way. Katie was calm at first. She listened, her expression unreadable. But as Lauren explained, Katie's face shifted. Her eyes narrowed, and I could tell that she was processing the words but not fully accepting them. "I just don't think this is the right path, Lauren," Katie said, her voice tight but controlled. "You're making a huge mistake. You need stability. You need a career that will set you up for success. Music is a hobby, not a future." I watched from a distance, knowing that this was a pivotal moment for both of them. Lauren was standing her ground. Katie, for the first time, wasn't able to impose her will. "I'm not choosing a hobby, Mom. I'm choosing a life that makes me happy," Lauren replied, her voice firm. "I know what I want to do. I'm not asking for your approval. I just need you to respect my decision." For the first time in a long while, I saw Katie falter. She didn't know how to respond. I don't think she had ever imagined this kind of defiance from her daughter. I saw her mouth open, ready to protest again, but she stopped herself. For a moment, she just stared at Lauren as if searching for the words to change her mind. But there was nothing left to say. Katie knew deep down that Lauren wasn't going to change her mind, no matter how much she tried to manipulate her or guilt her into conforming. "You've made up your mind, then?" Katie asked, her voice softer, almost resigned. "I have," Lauren replied, her gaze unwavering. Katie exhaled slowly, her shoulders slumping slightly as if a heavy burden had settled onto them. "Then I guess there's nothing more to say." The moment hung in the air between them, thick with unspoken words. I could see that Katie wasn't giving up on her vision for Lauren, but she was starting to realize that she couldn't force her daughter into a life she didn't want. It was as though something inside of her had finally cracked. Katie, the woman who had tried so hard to shape her family into a perfect image, was realizing that she didn't have the power she thought she did. Lauren stood tall in that moment, unshaken. I had never been prouder of her. She had chosen her own path, a path that wasn't dictated by anyone else's expectations. It was her choice. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't playing a role. She was living her truth. Katie didn't argue. She didn't scream. She didn't even cry. She just stood there, watching her daughter leave the room. For the first time, she saw Lauren as her own person, someone who could make her own choices regardless of the dreams Katie had for her. Later that evening, when Katie and I found ourselves alone, there was a shift in the air. Katie didn't say anything at first. She just sat down, her eyes distant. I could see that she was processing everything, just like she had when I confronted her with the evidence of her betrayal. She was silent, her thoughts lost in a place I couldn't reach. "You're right," she said, her voice almost a whisper after a long pause. "She's not me. She's her own person, and I have to respect that." I didn't know what to say to that. I didn't know if she was speaking to me or to herself or to the universe. But it was the first time I had heard her admit that she didn't have control over everything. It wasn't much, but it was a shift. And I wasn't sure if it was enough to make a difference, but it was a start. Katie's facade had big asterisk end to crack. I saw the woman who had once demanded perfection, who had built her life around control and status, begin to question herself. And in that moment, I realized that she wasn't the only one who had been living a lie. We all had. We had all been playing roles in a story that no longer made sense. Lauren had chosen her path, and in doing so, she had set herself free. Katie, on the other hand, had no choice but to face the fact that her perfect life was crumbling. And while I couldn't say I felt sorry for her, I could see that for the first time, she wasn't in control anymore. The mask had fallen. And as the days passed, I began to understand that we all had to confront the truth in our own way. 2 months after the wedding, I had started to adjust to the quiet rhythm of life without Katie. I had moved on from the initial shock of the betrayal, and though there were still moments of deep hurt, I had found a sense of peace in the absence of the constant tension. The house felt emptier, but in a way, it was lighter. The weight of the past was slowly being replaced with the feeling that I could breathe again. I had finally started to believe that maybe this was a new beginning. Lauren and I had settled into a routine, and she had fully embraced her choice to pursue music production. I supported her every step of the way, watching her grow into a confident, self-assured young woman. Her passion was contagious, and the studio felt like home again with her presence filling the space. We worked together, discussed ideas, and laughed at the inside jokes we shared. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. For the first time in a long time, I was proud of the life we were building, even if it wasn't the life I had imagined for us. Then, out of nowhere, I received a call from Katie. Her voice was different. It was dry, professional, but I could hear something else there, a hint of vulnerability I hadn't heard in years. "Mark," she said, her tone almost flat, "I need to ask you something. I'm inviting you to speak at the bank's annual conference. The theme is unconventional paths to success. I think you'd be perfect for it." I was taken aback. The last time we spoke, it had been after the wedding, a brief and uncomfortable exchange that left me with the sense that Katie wasn't ready to face what she had done. But now, she was calling me out of the blue, asking me to speak at an event that was tied to the very institution where she had worked. I wasn't sure how to respond. The professional part of me knew it could be a great opportunity. But the personal side of me, well, it was still scarred from everything that had transpired. The idea of sharing the stage with her, standing in front of an audience with the woman who had shattered everything I thought I knew about my life, felt like an odd proposition. "What's the